So hello, everybody. Today is January 11th, 2018. 2018, not 2017. And this is the sort of alternate SIG architecture office hours where things are a little bit more unstructured and we invite sort of open business for folks to put stuff on the agenda. I'm Joe Beda, and so I'm doing the recording and doing a little bit of leading since Jace may have to take off, and Brian's been on vacation and is visibly underwater. I can see it in the video right now. So I put a couple of things on the agenda that I know have cropped up. The one thing is that, you know, Caleb and I have been having a bunch of back and forth around the CAT process. I think it'd be great to have an ongoing discussion there. Tim sent email to I don't know, Kubernetes dev talking about regular meetings around API review. Question of, do we want to do this in this meeting? Do we want to actually do that as a separate meeting? I think, you know, Brian said that, hey, you know, we might want to do it as part of these office hours. Are there other agenda items that folks really want to make sure that we get to during this hour?
Aaron had one about the SIG Testing org. I think he said he would come, but maybe late.
That org structure was sorry, I still need to log out and log back in.
That's Tim. Oh, hey, yeah. Tim. Mr.
Yeah, I recorded the meeting for Robert the other day. The org structure was a part of the conversation from the steering committee meeting and the architecture meeting from last week. And there was an action item to just create the initial org and ask for forgiveness later. We had enough people that had consensus on it, and there was feedback, and Aaron's here now, so I think he can talk about it more.
Yeah, so I went ahead and created, excuse me, I created the org. I also created org for every other SIG. So I'm now the proud owner of some 20 to 30 something GitHub organizations. And I don't think it's a good idea, but I've gone ahead and done it anyway. Basically.
Well, I think squatting on them is a good idea.
Sure. Squatting's a good idea.
Yeah, you can split that with Tim, because Tim, how many orgs do you have? Like all the rest of them?
I think I've got about 25. It's actually impossible for me to figure out because I can't find a place where GitHub lists all the orgs I own.
Oh, sweet.
Can you go through the list of orgs? The ones that I'm co-owner with you, I know about, but there are a bunch that have no public members. Yeah. When you create an org, please remember to make your membership public.
Yeah. So on that, there's an issue in the community repo. Guys, I'm sorry, my voice is not super here, so I'm going to try and keep this short. There's an issue on what are the orgs that are part of the Kubernetes project, and I'm trying to come up with what are part of the project today and what are we squatting on, just so we know what we have. So Tim, you and I should follow up offline, and Brian, I think I need your sign off on that issue so that we can just say, yes, this is it, we can document it, we can get it, yes, document list of organizations.
Yeah, I'll do that as soon as Tim takes a look. Yeah, Dim's posted the issue number to the chat.
It's got the committee steering label on it. There's also another issue about what are the standards that organizations should follow if they are part of the Kubernetes project. And so that's what I could really use some feedback on. When I created the SIG Testing org, I posted to the email list a couple things that I went through. So like, I made sure you have to have 2FA enabled to be a part of that org. A couple other things. I think the substantive thing is I'm trying to get the CLA bot hooked up to it. And the other question was, we were talking about, so right now we have kates.io/whatever redirected for a large number of our Golang packages. And Tim had a PR out to try and redo that to be regex based instead of hard coded. And I was trying to propose that if we're going to go the route of having an organization per SIG, that we don't have kates.io redirect to potentially multiple GitHub organizations. So instead, if I have a repo called frameworks hosted in an organization called Kubernetes-sig-testing, I would love for the package hosted there to be testing.cates.io/frameworks. And I would love for this to be a pattern that the other SIGs could follow from a discoverability perspective if this is the direction we want to proceed. I wasn't sure if I was blocked on Tim's PR to make this a little more regex based to try pushing that. Again, when I raised this at SIG Testing, what I got was, sure, theoretically that's possible, but are you sure you want to go that route? This seems like an awful lot of administrivia and overhead. So where I landed with like having an org per SIG overall is like, I'd love to have some idea of consistent teams and labels and process across this org. And right now we don't do that for the like 8 orgs that we have. And we're just sort of implying that this is going to have to be solved now for 30 something orgs.
I don't think Brendan's doc did not say create the org per SIG. It only said if they have artifacts that are publishable, right? It didn't explicitly say create the organizational structure just, ad hoc. I think the only reason we're squatting on them now, but it's only if the SIG has artifacts that they want to hold and publish within that under that SIG's purview. That was part of what his doc.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess what I kept hearing in response was just really think about if so many organizations are worth it. Like, could we not accomplish the same thing by having a catch-all org, such as...
No. Because the reason is, the point is, and Tim is exactly right, the point is not about creating a lot of organizations. The point is about decentralizing the decision-making.
So what if we just expanded the pool of people who had the capability to create repo?
No, because the trouble is that if you have a bunch of, if you have a contrib org, I mean, for the same reason we want to have code owned by SIGs, you're going to have a tragedy of the commons, or you're going to have a bunch of people giving opinions on things that they don't have purview over, right? So like if you have one giant org, you're either going to have an org where nobody feels ownership and it's like, oh sure, throw something in there, it's not ours, or you're going to have people from all over the place commenting on whether or not this thing should be a Kubernetes project. Neither of those are good for the community.
Right, but I wasn't proposing that, Brendan. What I was talking about was the model of, like, say Kubernetes Incubator is owned by everybody who is currently a member of the Kubernetes-sig-leads mailing list. So it's substantively, it's still like everybody who's a lead of a SIG can have decision-making power over whether they want to make a repo for their SIG.
No, but the thing is that becomes the tragedy of the commons then, where like I don't really feel like I don't feel ownership.
You have to help me understand.
But Aaron, I think one of the things is that for the associated projects thing in Brendan's doc, they're not associated with SIGs. It's just stuff that like people are doing that they want to make sure that they can take advantage of some of the plumbing in Kubernetes. Is that correct, Brendan? Am I remembering right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's
right.
External people opt in, and there is no, we don't have to do anything really.
Right, and so those are the projects that, according to that doc, aren't part of the Kubernetes project, so I don't care about them. I'm trying to solve the problem of the 26 repos that live in Kubernetes-Incubator today, theoretically are owned by a SIG, and in the brave new world where we have a GitHub organization per SIG, those are going to be scattered amongst 30 GitHub.
So let's be clear. Like Tim is exactly right in saying we don't have a GitHub org per SIG. We have any SIG that wants to sponsor a project can do so within its own org. That doesn't mean we go proactively out and we create all these orgs for all these SIGs until they want to sponsor something.
So Aaron created a spreadsheet that enumerated all the repos, and I went through and specified which SIG each repo belongs to. How many of the SIGs have repos already? Do you have a ballpark guess?
Give me a second. I'll see if I can pull that spreadsheet up. So that's an orthogonal effort, assigning SIG ownership.
But just to get a sense for if we exploded Incubator into SIG orgs, how many SIG orgs would that be?
Also to be clear, I'm not proposing that we explode Incubator. Right, like I think we should leave the status quo as it is. Like I don't want to go and try and re-architect the system onto the existing stuff.
The proposal talked about having a GitHub organization named Kubernetes-sig-foo for every repo that was owned by that SIG.
I know, but there's a difference between how you go forward versus how you there's no value I think in blowing up the world that has created so far. This is about new repos we create going forward.
I think that's fine, Brendan, but this could be one way just to get some data to get a guess about what, how many SIGs might need repos.
Totally agree. I think it's a good data point. I just want to be clear about the fact that.
So this is not the greatest thing, right? I just counted for those that are in Kubernetes and Kubernetes Incubator, but it comes out to 20 different SIGs, each distinctly own something.
There needs to be a level of jurisprudence that the SIGs will have to go through, and it should be their responsibility to determine whether or not, even if these things should be sunset out of Incubator, or whether or not they want to maintain the sunset out of Incubator into an associated repo, as Brendan has specified.
I feel like the concern
here, talking about like 12 different things at once here.
Yeah. Can I go back to? I feel like the concern here was over decision-making power, and that's a social construct. We don't necessarily have to have a technical construct of all these different GitHub organizations to solve that, do we?
Well, I think that. So I agree that that's possible. And I would be okay with a notion of saying, like, actually even SIG sponsored ones don't show up in Kubernetes - whatever, and you can just have a SIG sponsored org wherever you feel like having a SIG sponsored org. I think that actually makes the problem worse.
Yes.
Because you want to have consistency. I think at the SIG sponsored level you have to have consistency, and so I think restricting it down is important. I don't think you can restrict it any further down than organization per SIG, because I think if you do that, then you end up with the tragedy of the commons, where you have an org where no one feels direct responsibility, and it's very hard to point backwards to people and say you need to fix a problem here. And that's why I landed where I landed. I'm not wedded to it necessarily, but I think it's the best solution.
I'm just trying to be the voice of everybody who I have talked to who has implemented this or might be on the hook to implement this. They are cautioning that it is a bad idea to distribute this across SIGs, and we should instead think about how we could do this consistently with the with the GitHub org that we have. Is there some other pattern we could follow to denote consistency? And could we just trust that we as humans can do the right thing and kick out bad actors as appropriate?
It's not about that. It's about the fact that we do not. As evidenced by this particular effort, we don't make decisions well or quickly. And that's just a fact of life, and it's because we're so large, and we need to decentralize.
Oh, I agree. Look, I just had another fun conversation where I tried to propose, hey, what if I turn on the same level of merge automation for every repo in Kubernetes? And I'm having people fight back at me. So
I think, Aaron, that's a good topic that I think we should discuss in terms of, like, to be a repo in the Kubernetes org, you have to be this tall. And that means consistent labels, that means merge automation, that means CLA bot, and we should do that across every repo that we own. That seems something that is totally doable. Now, that's different from the organization stuff, but like, I think we have to establish standards of, like, to be this tall, or to, like, be a repo in the Kubernetes world, you have to be this tall. I think that's totally within scope. It's a little bit separable just in terms of.
I agree with wait, I want to do a time check.
Please.
Here. And we're not really converging. Could someone volunteer to go make a list? There are two main alternatives being discussed, which is repos for multiple SIGs in the same org, whatever that org is called, and separate orgs per SIG. Could someone just go write up what we need to do to enable distributed decision-making in each case, the technical issues, and the social concerns, for example, about tragedy of the commons, which I agree has been a problem for every, like, contrib-like thing that we've had in the past. And then we can look at, well, what are the potential social or technical mitigations for either case, and we can make a decision, because I don't think we have all the information gathered together in one place to really have a productive discussion about this right now.
I guess I feel a little bit differently. I feel like the proposal that I put out is 80% right, and we can figure out the rest in the details, and I would prefer to ratify it and move forward.
To talk about the details, and we can't come to consensus on them, Brendan. The devil is where the details are.
I don't think so. I think we're going to pave the places. By ratifying it, you'll find the places that are pain points, and you'll smooth them. That's what I believe, and we'll actually make progress. But
I'm in agreement with Brendan.
So in terms of the people who would implement this, That's like SIG Testing and ContribX folks. Is that correct, Aaron?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm an active participant in both of them. I'm feeling pretty frustrated right now.
So I think, okay, so a couple of things here is that if we ratify Brendan's doc as right now, that essentially establishes a direction, but it's not enough to start implementing right now because the details need to be done. So there's a different definition of ratification there. And I think some of the frustration on Aaron's part is that this thing is still not shovel ready, even if we ratify it, right? Because there are decisions and there are things that need to be made. And so I think, like, we can do both say this is generally the right direction in terms of the different types of projects, but then also recognize that it's still not shovel ready and there's more decisions to be made.
I agree. And I would also say that I don't think that we have to, like, we can have parts of it be aspirational, right? Like, it's not like we have to, it doesn't have to be perfectly implemented on day one, right? Like, we can say, like, okay, well, that part is, you know, that part's an unfunded mandate and we'll get to it, right? I think that it's about setting direction, not about, anyway.
Well, speaking of that, I think there's one part which maybe is more or less shovel ready, which is the 3 categories and the goals. So can we maybe
let's lock that down. Yeah.
Maybe defer some of the implementation details and just say this is the direction we're going and these are our goals for why we're doing this.
So Aaron, would you be happy if in Brendan's doc there was a, you know, we called out the fact that, hey, there's still some details to be worked out around, like, hey, we want to have SIG sponsor projects. We still aren't quite sure whether there's going to show up in a central repo or multiple repos, and that's some details that need to be figured out, but we can actually ratify the rest of it.
Sure. I think I like Brian's suggestion of we're trying to figure out how to best implement the second category. I would love to see Brian, who has elaborated a bulleted list of all the things you need org permissions to do, and maybe Caleb, who has elaborated all of the ways that other projects have implemented decision-making and organizational structures, to hash out the pros and cons of organization per SIG and single organization. And then I would like to not voluntold the community about this, but rather get their feedback and adjust if we hear strong signals in one direction or the other. Time box.
Totally, and I agree, and that was actually what I'm trying to get to, actually, is just the ability to release the doc to the community and say, here's our plan going forward, please scream and yell. And then 2 weeks later say, okay.
Yeah, and I will...
And call out the things that are still in flux, right?
Repos are relatively easy to move. We've done it lots of times. So, you know, if we create an org and put some repos there and decide, well, that org doesn't make sense, we can just move them.
Right, and to Tim's earlier point, we should perhaps disassociate the vanity domains from the repos so that a repo move doesn't have code implications.
Okay, so what's the action item out of this? What do you want me to write down?
Aaron, will you put any comments into the doc where you feel like I'm incurring pain on people without being explicit about the fact that I am incurring pain on people? And I will note those as, we apologize that we know there's pain here. We will go and figure out what the pain is and make sure that we don't put it on people disproportionately. And then I'll publish it to Kubernetes dev, you know, today or tomorrow or Monday or some one of these days.
Can we also just make it clear what the intent is of the separation, so we can distinguish implementation details that may change from...
Absolutely, and I think there's a gold section at the beginning. If you think that there's stuff in there that needs to be added or is unclear, just let me know what, and I'll go run through it again and make sure that I feel it's okay.
I'll take another look.
Well, okay, so wait, so the action item is Aaron's didn't note places in Brendan's doc where there's pain or confusion, right, or uncertainty.
Brian tells me where the goals are unclear, and I'll do the same.
Well, review goals and with Brendan and make sure they are crisp.
And I'll put something in there as well to say, like, that this stuff is aspirational in the sense of, like, if it's not all implemented on day one, we don't care. And Aaron, if it makes you feel better, we could implement. So Seattle has this policy around, like, last person to touch the telephone pole has to bring it up to code.
Why we don't have Google Fiber, by the way.
It's why we don't have Google Fiber. I know, but we could effectively put something to that degree in there. It's like, if you want a SIG sponsored repo, you're going to have to pick up the shovel and help help implement some of the infrastructure. I'm okay with that. If SIG testing and contribx feel like, we're putting out unfunded mandates on them, I don't want people to feel that way.
I'm slightly confused because SIG architecture last time only made the decision about one SIG org, and that was SIG testing as a pilot. And we agreed that it would be like a first way of getting initial feedback, not the creation of bajillions of orgs.
Totally agree.
So I'm slightly confused by why I know we had a conversation in SIG testing and there was some feedback from Eric about, straddling, and that was good feedback, and I agreed to some of that around process. But what I'm struck by is why did we proactively create all the other orgs, and why is there feedback from contribx too about org structure and creation?
Contributor experience is coming from the perspective of discoverability and ease of onboarding new contributors.
And automating all the things consistently.
I think it's good to explore what it would take to automate everything consistently. I think we need to do that. I don't think we need to proactively create all the orgs.
Well, I think squatting on them.
Squatting on them is fine. Yeah, I don't care. That's fine. I don't mind one way or the other. But I don't think we should be like, oh God, it's super manual and we're going to have to do it for 30 orgs.
Yeah.
We should say.
I think the reason we arrived at that point was exactly because of the new repo process doc, which said this is the direction that we're going. And as Aaron said, 20 SIGs do have repos right now. So, creating them and squatting on them because they seem like more than half of them are likely to be needed.
Sounds good to me. I just want to make sure that we don't throw up our hands because we don't have the automation right now.
Right.
Okay.
But yeah.
So one thing that would be good to capture in the notes also is we're going to need some consistent way to keep track of credentials. This is a problem already for all of our orgs and fake users and things like that. And people are putting them in spreadsheets and docs and random other things.
So which credentials are we going to need though? There's the Zoom credentials. That's probably it, right? Everything else keys off of Google accounts or GitHub accounts.
Maybe.
All of the 2FA recovery codes for all of the Cade's mirror users.
There's robot.
Yeah, there's all the robot GitHub accounts have credentials as well.
Oh, Caleb, you're echoey.
Yeah, all the GitHub robots all have credentials that need to be managed. All the alias accounts for how we have things structured today. That's I think 5 to 7 sets of credentials per SIG.
Wait. So there's the robot accounts and then all the what are the alias? The alias accounts for. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Which also need a reasonable two-factor solution. So there's the backup codes besides their login credentials. There's, I guess, also in theory, a bunch of web tokens or API keys for webhooks and whatnot, deploy keys.
Yeah. All right. Well, that seems to be definitely a separable problem, but still a pain in the butt.
Okay, half the time is gone, so we should probably move to KEP. Or I see some new people showed up today. Maybe we should ask why they showed up, whether they have questions to be answered, since KEP is more kind of a regular working item.
I showed up because I wanted to talk about that previous topic and the, well, also because I just should have been showing up the whole time, but I wanted to talk about the API discussions, but I actually have to drop off right now. I just remembered I have to go to a kid's school thing, so sorry.
All right, well, I'll put that on a future agenda item then for you, Tim.
Please.
All right.
And I will make every effort to attend this regularly now. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, let me just move that around. Thanks, Tim. All right, so the KEP stuff, Let's see. I want to get to the point where we feel like this process is out of alpha and we can start rolling it out more widely. And some of that is just crisping up some of the definitions and make sure that we're all of a mind around this stuff. Towards that, I have been working with, and I had a meeting with SIG Docs, and I've been working with the ContribX folks around creating a community-facing portal or website. And so this would be including a sort of searchable indexed pretty way of actually surfacing, see you later, Kim, surfacing the KEPs so that they're easier to read, easier to discover, they feel more official. That's one of the value adds for people writing KEPs then. But then along with that would be a place where we could put the contributor guide, have the place to go for the latest release information. So essentially starting to try and draw the sort of pile of markdown docs that we have across bunches of repos that are, you know, and pull that into something that's more user friendly. So that's work that's ongoing. We're going to borrow some of the tools and processes from the SIG Docs folks, but right now, and there's still a little bit of like, my thinking is that this thing has to have its own sort of life outside of the main Kubernetes.io site, just because there's things like freezing on that for feature branches and stuff like that, whereas the community-facing site will be, the community-facing site will have its own life cycle. So that's just a quick update on that. Now, where this relates to KEP is, it had been on the back of my mind for a while to sort of go through and finish up the process before we roll this out wider, because the template and the process document were at odds with each other in terms of some of the states and stuff. Meanwhile, sort of like that had been on sort of my mental to-do list this week. Caleb then in a separate thing pulled the KEP around pulling cloud providers out and was moving that from the design docs thing into the KEP folder that, all right, see you later, Brennan. The KEP folder that is at the root of the community repo now. And along the way, he marked it from draft to approved. And so there was a lot of discussion around what exactly does approved mean for a KEP. And so that larger question, extracting it from just that one particular KEP, I pulled into a PR that updates the process document. And so that's the one 1584. And let me post this into the chat. There's two things that are at the root of this, I think, in terms of, there's a lot to go through there, but if I can summarize things quickly, there's a disagreement around the process of how we imagine that folks will actually create and modify KEPs, and what does the approval bit mean around those things. And then there's some discussion around the metadata and how much do we lean on Git for metadata versus actually making things explicit in the metadata. That's a little bit separate and I think is more nitpicky. I think the larger issue here is one of the things we talked about before, and I thought we had decided on, but maybe I'm misremembering, was the idea that we want to encourage folks to check in KEPs early in draft form, work with them with smaller PRs so we don't end up with these like huge 100-comment PRs, and then have the approval bit saying that, hey, this KEP is mostly right, it's a direction that is widely agreed upon, have that be something that happens separate from the initial PR that checks in the KEP. I don't want to summarize things for Caleb, but Caleb, I think, is saying that the submitting that initial PR is approval. And I'd like to disconnect the PR process from the approval process. Caleb sees those things as being joined at the hip. But Brian, yes.
Well, go ahead, Brian.
Okay, so I actually agree with the idea of checking in the KEPs early. What I would like is criteria for merging a KEP should be kind of acceptance that the SIG or subproject will actually review that KEP and assign an approver and things like that, that the KEP is well formed and will get attention. If it's not something that's welcome at all, I think we can just, or if it's completely malformed or it's in the wrong place or whatever, those issues should just get resolved before it gets merged. But you know, if it's actually going to disconnect the well-formedness of KEP from hashing out all the details, I think is something that makes sense. And approval of the KEP should be the final stamp of this should go forward, and the approver who's designated by the owner for that sub project is the person who needs to sign off.
So what I'm hearing is that there's 3 states. There's the proposing a KEP, which is a PR. We want to probably have a certain set of standards of like the owning SIG has to accept it, and we probably want to have like some approvers and stuff like that set early on before the KEP first gets merged. And then, but then it's in draft form, and then there's a working document, multiple PRs, and then finally there's an approval with a PR for flipping the approval bit, and that is somewhat significant that this thing is widely agreed upon that this is the direction we're going. Is that the summary there? I just want to restate it to make sure I'm not misunderstanding.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay. So Caleb, my understanding is this is not your preferred way of going with this stuff. I'd love to hear your take on this stuff, man.
My preference, I don't think, is radically different. I think the process doc even says that approved only means that the motivation for the KEP, really what used to be the only design proposal, has been agreed upon, that is a reasonable direction to go, and it is in a reasonable roadmap for the SIG. So that I'm not imagining, and I'd love to hear Jace's opinion, but I think he's probably going to drop off for a meeting, was that in order to get rapid feedback, we would only consider the motivation section as gating approved or not. That approved means that the motivation, that this is a legitimate need that we intend to either shepherd or dedicate resources to addressing in some reasonable time frame, was what approval means. And then that the detailed design would come in a second PR to that same KEP. As the conversation proceeds, then you have a clearer direction of where to go. And so that's all I meant by approval. So it would happen quickly as to whether if something was reasonable or not. And the PR merging would be the resolution processing by the SIG as to whether it was approved as we agree with the motivation. We are going to explicitly defer it until some other time so we know more, or we're going to reject it. We don't want to lose this motivation, so we've merged anyway. I think that not that the PR merging signals approval, it's the PR merging signal that it had been processed by the SIG and was resolved into one of those states for further discussion or for closure. So you muted, Joe.
I think that is significantly different than I think what I was saying. I don't want to speak for Brian. My understanding is that approved is actually looking at the bulk of the KEP, not just the motivation section, and stands in for the fact that our previous process was that we would hold PRs open until everything is perfect, and then we would submit the PR, and we ended up with this 200 comments on a PR, and it was unreadable. In my mind, the approval process is the moral equivalent of checking in those Mondo PRs that we had before. And so that means that we're looking at the bulk of the KEP, including the high points of the design, and the approval covers the whole KEP, not just the motivations. And I mean, like, if we introduced a state instead of draft, we called it accepted, right? And accepted means that, hey, we're going to work on this, the SIG has accepted. I'd be cool with like naming draft to accepted. But in my mind, approved means that like you can look at this and all the details in that are approved by the people who are listed by approvers, or at least the bulk of the details are there.
I like that. I believe it's actually at odds with your previous desire for having non-large PRs dangling. That if the PRs themselves are small and you won't necessarily know the design up front, I think it's entirely reasonable to separate the use case from a concrete implementation that attempts to achieve that use case. And that the important thing is to agree on whether this is a direction we want to go in or not, to provide that feedback early to contributors as part of signaling.
Well, I think both are important, both the fact that, hey, this is something that we're working on, but then the technical direction here is good enough to start implementation, and people, and it's signed off to the point where people won't write a bunch of code and then be surprised when they get whiplashed later. So for me, accepted means that I can start writing code on this, and I probably won't get surprised further down the line.
We definitely need to distinguish those states somehow.
So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Brian, but I think the distinction is made by the appearance of the detailed design in the CAP, and that you, as a potential contributor or proposer, have worked with the sponsoring SIG, the people who are required for the approval, and you had that conversation, and that the result of that is the detailed design appearing in the CAP. So that the state is that that the signal was that there's an actual design there, not that there's a state, a text field that says that. I think it should be very clear whether there is a design that one could begin implementing or not, because it'll just be there in the CAP or it won't.
So your suggestion is the remedy is to remove anything that's not approved?
Essentially, yes. And because if that is the overall goal, I think Git provides a pretty reasonable mechanism for that. It's just don't merge things that aren't approved. And that's so that the conversation happens in stages to prevent us having a very large Mondo PR that's open for months or a year. Or also not accumulating cruft like we have, because in our current set of design docs, it's not necessarily clear which of those have been approved, which of those have been implemented, and what state they are in, because you merged everything all at once. And particularly for the cloud provider extraction design proposal, which this CAP that we were talking about earlier is just a rewrite of, that design proposal has been in there for a year and some number of months. But it's unclear what the state of that proposal is, and now that it's been superseded by a CAP. And that, I imagine, is the general case of the design proposals that we have today. And I would like to avoid that by not checking in craft.
I think some of the disconnect here is a lot of times the design is iterative. There's multiple points that you want to work through, and if we hold the bar that the only thing we ever check in is stuff that's totally approved and agreed upon, I think that leads to these big PRs, because these things end up being interconnected in a certain level. And so a lot of times when you're doing designs, you want to put some ideas out there and you want to sort of straw man that stuff out, and you want to actually have and then you're going to adjust that over time, and eventually you settle on a design. And so I think having a working document is a useful thing when you're trying to iterate to get to a design that works well, because things do end up being like there are times where it's I would want to say I think that sounds good, but I need to see the rest of the design before I go ahead and say I'm willing to commit to this thing. And so you need these things to sort of settle together. And so I think having a draft state that people can read and say this is the current thinking, but it's not final yet, for me is a very useful state for these things to be in while you're actively working on the design. Now, I agree that we don't want to have a lot of cruft checked in there, and that's why there's this state where if it's marked as draft, then that's essentially cruft, and it's marked as draft and it hasn't made progress in 6 months, then we can go ahead and actually mark it as abandoned or something like that. So I don't know, Brian, you look like you want to.
Yeah, I do have a concern that if we effectively just remove the state field and say we're just going to leave TBDs for everything that's not done yet, it will encourage the pattern that we already have of not filling out those TBDs and just moving ahead with the implementation and leaving effectively the CAP incomplete. That is a very common pattern that we see today is people file proposals and then they just spin because they don't have clear approvers and there's no clear process and there's bike shedding and 200 comments and whatever. And then they just go ahead and say, well, I actually got consensus with the people who matter, and they get their code merged. And
then we have no documentation.
The proposal never gets completed.
And I guess I'm not proposing that we eliminate the status field. I am suggesting that the status field gets updated at Git events so that the detailed design, whether you want to say it's, I don't think that the status field, I'm not imagining that the status field is something in general that a human is editing. I am imagining that there, as the various sections of the cat get merged, that as the bot is doing the merging, it is updating the status field because it's in a, right now, a YAML document that should be touched primarily by automation in most cases. The same for not having people edit the created at and updated times manually, because I don't imagine having been a developer for some period of time and knowing a fair number of developers, they're going to, that anyone is going to manually edit these fields. And so
I do want to draw a parallel that, you know, we did say that we were inspired in some, or at least I was inspired with the stuff with the PEP process. And there's a whole set of open PEPs that are under construction where they have a state field that's marked draft. And people do update this stuff because it essentially changes where it shows up in the index. And as we build this website, we can actually have big sort of red draft letters over the ones that are still draft. And so that'll actually create the optics that will essentially encourage folks to actually make this stuff cleaned up, readable, and something that they can point to and say, hey, I'm the author of KEP 37, which is something that they'll want to be able to talk about.
I guess I have drawn more inspiration from the Rust RFC process, which, while newer than the Python PEP process, is a process that was created in, well, in, I guess, the common era where we have distributed version control and reasonable hosting for Git projects as a general expectation for, certainly for any developer who's entering the industry now. And so they were able to design what appears to be a fairly lightweight process, and it seems to be working fairly well. They've got around 2,000 of these things, and reading through them, they do seem pretty informative. And that is, I guess,
I feel like we've talked this to death because the Rust process essentially uses GitHub issues as the sort of the thing to discuss this. And we've already established, for whatever reason, there's a difference between the Rust community and the Kubernetes community, that when we open these things up, when we use a Mondo issue for these things, they never converge, they don't close, they essentially become unreadable to anybody who's not sort of like, you know, makes it their life's work to track this stuff.
So actually the Rust project uses a variety of mechanisms. So their RFCs are essentially indexes which represent the chain of custody for an enhancement. They link to mailing list discussions. They link to issues that are about the implementation, not about the design of the implementation. They have links to the PRs as well. And so I guess I'm imagining that we are creating a document that's not just a design spec, but also allows you, and I think I want to steal Jace's steel thread comment, that is a steel thread through an idea from conception to implementation to improvement or retirement. It's not just about I made a design proposal. It's a design proposal plus plus. So we've had, I've seen internal processes that focus a lot about launching features. As a large corporation, you inevitably realize that it's not only the launch, but it's also the landing. And having the entire life cycle of an enhancement that's, a major enhancement to the project trackable in one single place, rather than having to go through, have to choose your own adventure, walking through GitHub issues, GitHub PRs, the Google Groups mailing lists, and any other Slack conversations you may have had about a particular issue. Having one place that is centralized for tracking this information.
I hear you. I just don't think the Rust process of building very, very large PRs will work for Kubernetes. It hasn't worked up until now. When you read through the process here, it really encourages folks to keep those PRs open until things are, approved, and then things get merged. And that's our current process by and large, and it just hasn't been working.
I think the biggest negative to merging PRs early is that one can't open a PR and then just make comments on parts that are not being changed by the PR. If that one thing were fixed by GitHub, then I think there would be no negative to checking in the PRs as early as possible. But I do agree that it makes sense for us to try something new compared to what we did before, and we should give it a try. I don't think we've, and I don't think it's worth debating indefinitely. And we should try it on some things and see if we have success with it. If it doesn't work, we can, revert back to the old way. That's fine. But, we are trying to solve some challenges with the old way, which I think necessitates doing things differently than the old way.
So I think it may help if we change some of the terms in these states to actually reflect some of what we're talking about. So if we change draft to accepted, that essentially means that there's some level of approval around the direction around this stuff. Approved, I mean, maybe we move approved from approved to, because
Final.
What's that?
Final.
Well, I think there's still we have to make allowances for the fact that during implementation, reality sets in and no plan actually sort of.
I think for that, we need to have metadata like last updated and things like that, or implemented, some requirement. And we discussed early on, should design docs and proposals be updated as the design changes? I do think we need something along those lines. Maybe, very old proposals that have been superseded. We do hope to reflect that to say, well, we stopped updating this, is now superseded by this other one. You should go look at that. But trying to keep some of that documentation more up to date and accurate, I think would be a benefit to the current contributors at whatever the current time is on the project to better, understand the state. That's my personal feeling.
So, yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with all that, Brian. I think there's still the question in my mind of final sounds very final.
I don't have strong feelings about that one. I like the idea of changing drafts to accepted. So there's some amount of diligence and decision making that has to be done for that state transition. It's not just like, oh yeah, someone submitted a KEP, we'll just merge it.
Yeah.
It's also like Organizer, right? There are new bugs and there are accepted bugs. There are assigned bugs. So, and we could do something similar to that.
So maybe we change accepted to implementable. And then there's
I was thinking accepted would be
that someone was that we assigned an approver and it was gonna get reviewed. Like we have an intent to actually move it forward to an approved state.
I get. Oh no, I'm sorry. Maybe I misspoke. So accepted. Okay, so we turn draft to accepted, and maybe we turn approve instead of to final. We name it implementable, right? So it goes from accepted to implementable to implemented.
I'm fine with that.
Because my personal preference would be before we start working and theorizing about state transitions, we actually get more than one KEP running through the process. Now, if we get to, 100 of KEPs and they all are different, I think we probably have a problem. But anything less than 100 is reasonably manageable number.
What we're trying to do, Caleb, is take our best guess at designing a process that we think will work as we scale this stuff up. And I think, it's clear that you disagree with where Brian and I sit with this stuff, but I think we have to do our best guess, and then as we get some experience, you know, I think everybody's open to changing and adjusting this stuff over time. But like right now, I think having these states, I mean, like this is the discussion that we're having. What do we think is the ideal set of states that'll actually stick with us, you know, long enough to actually start gaining some miles on this thing? We don't want to be changing it after every KEP, which is one of the reasons why, honestly, I didn't think that the KEP process was really ready to roll out widely yet. I was kind of surprised when it was brought up at KubeCon, because I felt like we hadn't had this stuff locked down to the point where everybody in this group was ready to actually commit to it. I feel like with the PR that I have open now, I think we're a lot closer to that. You know, especially with the changes that we've discussed today.
So I think that for all of these proposals, that any process change is an experiment. I would like to defer discussion until we have maybe 10 and do another check-in.
But we need to have enough process to get those 10 in, and we have to take our best shot at that. And that's essentially what we were just discussing right here.
So we're discussing metadata. I think that for 10 KEPs, we can trust people in the community, and there are enough people in the owner's file for the KEP to assume. I certainly am comfortable saying a chain of trust here for the first 10 KEPs, and revisit this again. We can have a retrospective, see how that's gone.
I'm going to disagree with that, because I think that as folks, you know, we need to take our best shot on what we think the process is, because if we are continually changing the process, it'll feel arbitrary and unfair to folks, because like, why did those early KEPs get to slide in, and then now there's new requirements as we scale this stuff out? And I think that there's also, like, people will read the process once and they won't necessarily read the process again as we update things. So I think there's a certain amount of like, we have to have something that we think is workable for the long term as we roll this stuff out, which is one of the reasons why I don't think it was ready to roll out at KubeCon, because we didn't have all those questions answered at that point.
I guess I disagree that we don't have enough information to at least pilot retrofitting some of the previous design proposals into the KEP process. Things that were already approved, things that have already been discussed from a technical standpoint. We're trying to see if they.
Did you just get saying that like a lot of the design proposals right now are full of cruft, right? So a big part of importing those into the KEP process is making sure that they are actually up to a certain bar, right? Because we do want to keep the KEP stuff clean. So we're not going to be able to move design proposals from that directly into KEPs without also making sure that they meet the bar for what we're looking for in KEPs.
I think that's fine. I think the first KEP that we have here has done enough due diligence to demonstrate that. I guess we're obviously at a point of disagreement here.
And I'm perfectly fine. Like, if you can get Tim, who unfortunately had to leave, to say that, hey, I'll be an approver for this, and I think that this thing is like ready to be implemented, and that the KEP is in good shape, then fine, let's move it to the approved state or the implementable state or whatever it is, right? My big feedback on that was, I don't want to mark something approved when we don't even have an approver. We can't actually list who it is that actually is approving that.
I guess my point was that so individuals from the cloud provider working group came to me and expressed concern that they didn't want to adopt the process because they didn't see value in it. I feel that if we are trying to roll out a new process, it has to provide value to the people who are subject to it. I feel like during the beginning, and you can define an arbitrary number of what beginning means, that there's going to be a bunch of legwork on the part of people who are interested in rolling out this process to support the people who are trying it out and reducing the friction for them. We're going to hopefully learn a lot about what is actually required and what is adding value and what is not adding value for the contributors.
So yeah, I agree with you that we have to show value for folks to actually be able to use the KEP process. Some of that value is the increased communication and the ability to be able to actually have a format for working in cross-SIG ways. Now, if this stuff is well underway, they don't have to use the KEP process. Now, if we want to make it easier for people to use the KEP process, if we want to make it easier for people to start to do these first couple of KEPs, we don't do that by relaxing the rules on the process. We do that by helping them tee things up. So you could help those folks by finding the reviewers, doing the back channel with those reviewers, and actually have them rubber stamp it so it looks like things go very smoothly. I don't think we should relax the process just because we want to make it easy for the first couple of folks to get in. That undermines the process.
So a quick question here. Just a quick question is there a way we could, if we thought about it as a self-service approach, and what would make people really want to opt into it? Like go to them and say why this is hard, how do we make it easier, but still look at capturing the right amount of information. If we weren't doing top-down handing things and looking to revamp a process that's top-down, but looked at it as how do we make it self-service, so from the bottom up, people wanted to get involved and said, what would it take to make it like that? Actually asked that question and then went out and looked to say, what do we need to do to solve it, and go talk to people? Is there something we could learn in that would make people want to adopt it or help us better this?
So I think that's a great idea, Matt. I think, I don't think we can force SIGs to adopt the KEP process for their own internal machinations for how they communicate things. As we build tooling, as we build exposure on this stuff, I think that brings value to it, and it brings a level of consistency across the product that I think will mean that folks will want to do that. I do think we need to provide a way such that a KEP that only impacts a single SIG or a couple of SIGs can be self-service, and those folks don't have to talk to any of us to be able to do that stuff. But I also think we want to make sure that there's a level of consistency so that when something has a KEP, people know what that means. That there's a certain level of approval when something is marked as approved as a KEP, and it means that, hey, that SIG has approved that thing. The early KEPs, what I'm imagining the earliest KEPs are going to be things that are going to be more cross-cutting across the project, because those are the things that need the wide communication, and those are the things where we've really fallen down, I think, up until now in terms of being able to communicate this stuff widely. So I don't think, like, I agree we want to add value, but I think that's going to come over time, and I think that, you know, trying to convert everything at once into KEPs is not a realistic thing for us to be able to do.
I think one point of confusion at the moment may be that in the long run, once the KEP process is ironed out and in use, we would expect the approvers of the KEP and the people reviewing the KEP to be solely the people in the technical domain that the KEP applies to. At the moment, since we're in the process of trying to hash out the process and the template itself, then people who are stakeholders in the KEP process are also looking at them. So there's kind of this sense of we're trying to create some good example KEPs so that the KEPs that follow kind of know how to create well-formed KEPs. So there are different sets of stakeholders then hopefully eventually will be involved in the longer term. So this KEP, what is labeled 002? There's a 001 KEP, I guess?
The KEP process is 001.
The KEP process is 001. Okay, so this is an effort that had a proposal that was underway. That proposal was approved, and now it's being translated to a KEP. And my understanding is the intent was to just try to put it into the form of a KEP and label the KEP approved because the proposal was approved. Is that correct? Caleb? Yes, he's nodding yes. Okay.
And so my argument was, if it's approved, we should have an approver.
And so then the new PR adds Tim as the approver, who is the person who reviewed the original proposal?
Yeah. And so, and I'm totally cool with that. I mean, like if Tim comes in there and says, yeah, I approved this, then yeah, let's move forward with it. But I think, like, I don't think we should mark something approved unless we actually have somebody who did the approving.
So you just want Tim on record to LGTM that PR that adds him as the approver?
Yeah.
Okay, so we should just assign it to Tim. That seems easy enough to do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the argument was for the longest while in there, Caleb had moved this to be to the approved state with the approver block in the metadata still being TBD. And for me, that's not keeping within the spirit of the process. All right, so action items out of this is let's get Tim to decide on the on that particular proposal. If he gives it a thumbs up, then that's great. Then we've moved forward there. I'll rewrite the proposal to talk about the new different types of states, and then we can go ahead and merge that. I'm going to hold off, Caleb, on removing some of the metadata from the thing until we actually get the tooling and the site up and running. If we can find a way to remove metadata and replace it with tooling, that's great. We can always remove that stuff later. What I don't want to do is actually create a hole for us where we have to go and try and, like, we have to build tooling to get things up and running.
Perhaps I don't want implementation details from the tooling leaking back into the KEPs themselves.
All right, well, you're welcome to roll up your sleeves and write some code to do that, but right now, I think the priority is being able to present this to folks so that they start seeing some of that value. If we can find ways to present it that actually leans on Git in a way that you say is possible, that's great. Then we can always go back and remove that extraneous metadata later. But for now, I think we've already decided on and improved the set of metadata that's in the KEPs. That was done a month or two ago. I really don't want to necessarily relitigate all that stuff now. Let's wait until we actually have a tooling and we can demonstrate that we don't need that. Then we'll go ahead and I'll be open for changing that. Okay, we are definitely out of time. I'll update the PR today or tomorrow and send that stuff out, and hopefully we can get the updated KEP process PR up and running. At that point, I would love to find a way. Oh, we lost Caleb. I'd love to find a way to roll this out more widely and get more folks using the process. All right. Thank you, everybody. I will upload the recording, and we'll see you all next week.